So with that, Cheslin, a very warm welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Thanks for having me. And yeah, very cold where I am as well. But I'd much rather be here than sitting in a lecture as students at this point in time. But I wish you guys all the best. Hope you guys are having a good time.
Let's just start here at the beginning, as in today, or the middle of your journey, perhaps. Can you just explain TymeBank, where you are geographically, and what the TymeBank business model essentially is?
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it very specific to South Africa for now, Colin. And again, happy to go more group kind of in the discussion, and I'll take your steer on that. But from a South Africa perspective, to give you guys a sense, obviously, it's probably the most southern one, yeah, the southernmost country on the African continent, 60 million people, highest Gini coefficient in the world, very high levels of unemployment at the moment. Um, so yeah, like I said, it's about 60 million people, and in essence, prior to us going live about 6 years ago, call it five big retail banks. So pretty much operating like an oligopoly within financial services and specifically banking. Fast forward to today, TymeBank's about just over 6 years old in terms of operational availability to customers, and just over 11.3 million customers in South Africa. So without a shadow of a doubt, the fastest growing bank in South Africa, and was probably one of the fastest growing digital banks in the world. Till today, we over the last 6 years, call it from a financial metrics perspective, most probably uh, at a minimum doubling our top line number every year, whilst only increasing costs by very low single digits. And as we go through the conversation, you get a sense of how our operating model and business model has lended itself well in the way that we've created the operating leverage that we've created. And I think it's an important aspect, especially as you start building businesses in the world we know today. Um, that level of efficiency is probably going to become a prerequisite to successful business as we go. And to give you guys a sense of just one metric, if we measure on efficiency, so TymeBank in South Africa, end to end, we must probably employ about 1,700 people, 1,800 people. And I'm talking full-time staff, contracted staff, third-party staff, people, not directly in our employ, but almost who work for us exclusively, most probably about 1,700 people. The next smallest bank in South Africa is 10 times that size. So the next smallest bank in South Africa has about 17, 18,000 people working for them, and we write the same amount of new business every month. So it'll give you a sense of how efficiently we run the business. And essentially what that allows us to do is to acquire customers at a fraction of the cost that anybody else does. And then the trick comes around how you monetize them as quickly as you possibly can to create some real lifetime value in the business. So, so
How many technologists have you got in that 1,700?
So locally in South Africa, very few. So if you look at technologists, so we'll separate, call it your more traditional kind of infrastructure networking, kind of call it the hardware guys, and then you separate what we'll call the software guys. So on the hardware side, most probably only about 70 people on the infrastructure side. But in the group, in the larger time group, we've got a 700 strong software engineering team based in Vietnam. But what that team does is that team services the bank in South Africa, as well as it services the bank in the Philippines, and will also services the businesses we've just set up in Indonesia and Hong Kong. So we've built a central model around that because again we think that's obviously our massive enabler across the world. But the fact that you can use one central service and create multiple instances is suddenly again your cost to serve continually reduces as you scale from market to market.
Mm. Do you have any branches?
What's that, Colin? so 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 in from a branchless perspective, we like to call ourselves a digital bank. So we don't own any physical real estate. But at the same time, I can also argue with conviction that we're also the most accessible bank in South Africa. So yes, we don't own a branch. We haven't laid a single brick. We haven't paid a single month of rental or entered into any lease agreement for physical space. But we've got the largest distribution in the country, and I think that lends well to call it the aspect of partnerships and why that's important in our business. But in essence, we've got a footprint of more than 1,000 points of representation, physical points of representation in South Africa. So it makes us, in my mind, the largest bank if you were to count those 1,000 points as branches, but we don't own a single piece of property.
Mm. Do you want to? Well, let's go back and we can explain that partnership and a model it in a wee bit. I just want to get a sense. When did you
Yeah,
actually join TymeBank? Because TymeBank has
yeah,
been, and I mean that in relation to when it really formed, because it's been there for a long time. It stopped. It started. It's kind
yeah,
of the consultants and getting involved, and then the telcos, and then pulling out. And there's been quite an
yeah.
interesting little journey before it's really got traction.
Yeah, for my sins, Colin, I've been there from day one. So I was one of the on day one there were 17 of us. There's about seven of us, 6 or 7 of us left in the business today. But there were 17 of us on day one in 2012. So call it 1 July 2012. We started the business. And the business went through different phases at the time. So I'm not as old as I look. Just Time Bank has made my hair all fall out. But yeah, the business in its essence has been around for just over 12 years, and the bank's been available to public for just over 6 years now.
Okay. Now, when you were starting to form it, you came up with some very interesting principles for a bank. I don't know, I don't want to put words into your mouth,
Yeah.
but one of the principles that your colleague and the group CEO, Colin, was chatting to me about is right in those early days, you said you never want to deal in cash. I thought that was such an interesting perspective when you're starting a bank.
Yeah, because in South Africa specifically, you've got this age-old saying of cash is king, right? So from a customer behavior perspective, it's most probably still pretty prevalent in South Africa. Cash is king. But you're right, Colin. There was a couple of tenets back in the day where we said that for us these are non-negotiable. So cash been a very typical business in the form of, or been a very typical bank in the form of having to make cash available through your own infrastructure was a non-negotiable for us. So we don't have a cash management department. We don't own a single ATM. We don't have a branch, etc. Branches was one of those non-negotiables. So we don't own any branches. We don't own any, call it, retail property in South Africa. And for the last 12 years, we've managed to build the business to what it is today without that. Now, the interesting thing is that I think kind of where we were as a country and as a consumer market 12 years ago, on the face of it, you look at the thing and say, like, that must be the silliest decision you could possibly make.
Mm,
Now, again, looking at things all equal back then, it's easy to say that. 12 years later, it's not as silly a decision, but it's still something from an industry perspective you've got to break down, right? Because the reality is that by and large, we're still the only bank that operates like that in the country at scale. So yes, there are one or two other so-called digital banks in South Africa, but they're servicing a fraction of the customers we serve. So
mm,
at the scale we're doing it, we're the only bank to do that. Now, what difficulty does that create in the system, right? Is that the analogy I always make is that Time Bank is the solo artist, and the reality is what we're competing against in a singing competition is a choir. Every other bank in the country operates in the same way. So in my mind, they're singing the same song, and you've got Time Bank on its own little trying to scale this thing, singing a completely different song. The reality of that, though, is that even though I believe we're singing the best song, the choir always ends up singing louder.
mm.
And the challenges that presents to the business is very, very different. But at the same time, almost forces you as a business or leaders of the business to think very differently around how you go about solving these problems.
Okay, so you've set some really strong principles.
Colin,
You just mentioned two. Go on, Keith.
yeah, could I ask a question at this point?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, where this question comes from, I had a conversation on one of my trips down to Joburg with Stephen Kossoff of Investec Bank. And one of the questions that I asked him, which I was intrigued by, is that being somebody who has been there since the very beginning of the bank, within the first 17 people, what has been the most surprising observations that you've noticed regarding the growth, the accelerated growth of your bank?
Yeah, great question, Keith. And was probably in the earlier days, and I think it's changed. Call it. There's been lots of different things that has surprised us at very different parts in our journey. So
Sure.
because of how we launched the bank, for example, so in the very early days, what surprised us was the type of customer we were onboarding. So about, call it 4 years ago, so when the bank was only 2 years old, more than 40% of our customers was 35 years and older.
Okay.
And when you look at it that way, you'll be like, gee, you're doing something so completely different, call it so disruptive to the industry. What you think would happen is so-called younger, more tech-savvy, more digitally literate customers would sign up. And yes, they did. What we weren't expecting to the extent that we saw that at the time, 40% of our customers were older than 35 years old.
Having noticed that, did you make any modification to your business model to attract the younger customer?
No, none at all. So it's interesting. We used to have this thing, call it a design manifesto, and we had these 10 heuristics. We had these 10 heuristics on there, and one of the heuristics were we designed for the 80%, not for the 0.08%.
Okay.
Right. So we had fundamental conviction in the model we've put together that the way we've done it, what we could get to is a broad spectrum of customer no matter what. Right. What surprised us was just how quickly older customers onboarded.
Yeah.
Not that they actually did, just how quickly they did. We thought they would be, call it your later adopters, we thought they'd be, but they actually adopted quite quickly, and that was the part that surprised us. Call it in the middle thing, the one thing that surprised us, and was probably still pretty much of a surprise now, is that the first kind of real copy, or the first attempt to duplicate what we've done only came in about 3.5, 4 years into our operation. One of the bigger banks in the country tried to enable distribution the way we did. That took a little bit longer than we thought it would. And the nice thing about that, though, is because we were anticipating it was going to come a lot earlier. We were evolving our distribution model in anticipation that they were going to come, so we could stay ahead of the curve. So that came a little bit late. On kind of almost the subsequent surprise to that, they were unable to scale it because it was so different to what they were doing. And I can only imagine them having these internal fights of saying, how do we scale or invest in this model? And all this model ends up doing is cannibalizing all the existing business we've built. So we haven't seen any of those attempts scale at any nature. And most probably the most recent surprise is that finally South Africa has real-time peer-to-peer digital payments. And surprise, not surprise, every other bank that's been around for a long time has, in my mind, with a lot of effort, tried to disintermediate that service. Whereas we've actually zero-rated the service for all customers with the intention of creating some real utility in the customer's hands, and where the industry's kind of actually gone against that, but again, with the intention of protecting what they've already built.
Okay, thank you, Colin.
That was good questions. What about the rest of the guys there? Have you got any questions?
Any questions coming from the floor? I've got a couple of more cracking questions, but I'll hold those till later, I think. Others? No? Press on, Colin.
Carry on.
Carry on.
Okay. It's interesting, that conversation about what you've learned, over the years, and then you've got this rule that you've set, designed for the 80%. I've been to the offices a couple of the offices. I've been up to the ones in Joburg. You have lots of these kind of rules and reminders about how you want people to think. One of them I quite liked was on the outside of your office, which is, or not your office, but the office rooms, the meeting rooms, where you're basically telling people, if they haven't got a good reason to be there, to bugger off. Can you talk to me about that and some of the other principles that you are pushing people? Because those, again, are wildly different to what you see in a normal organization.
100%. So efficiency is really important for us. So in everything we do, I think is one, call it business philosophy. So efficiency is really important for us. And we think about productivity very differently, though, Colin. And it's interesting. I think lots of traditionally people see productivity as the ability to do a lot of things in a short space of time. We don't see it that way. We're about, are you doing the right things all the time? And whether that is 1 or 2 things only versus 10, if you're doing 2 of the right things all the time, we think you're more productive than somebody doing 10 things just for the sake of getting 10 things done. So the principles Colin's talking about, we've got these little signs in our meeting rooms that says, 1, is this meeting necessary? And if your instinctive answer is no, by all means turn around and walk out of the room, right? And most probably the second point in some of those meeting rooms, and more the important one is the question we ask is, how does this help the customer? And in essence, when you're building a business that needs to scale, the only way you scale is by keeping your customers happy. So if you engaging in time-consuming things that doesn't necessarily, we believe, add any real value to what we offer to the customers, most probably a complete waste of your time. So we've tried to be extremely progressive and somewhat stubborn with some of those principles. But what we've seen those things allow us to do is at this point in time, we must probably be making anything between 400 to 800 production changes a month. Production changes in our environment. And if you think about a business who's operating at the scale that we do today, you must probably find very few one would be brave enough to want to do that. And because of something like that, for example, we've got a massive tech shop, but we have no freeze period. So we don't do any of these typical things. Oh, no more changes after November the X. And, because the business is properly agile and properly fluid. And I'd like to believe that the people that need to has their hand on top of all the detail.
Now, I've run a couple of courses out in Saudi. And actually, it's not just about Saudi, it's the courses and my experiences in large organizations globally. I find that there's lots of people that want to be innovative and they've got good ideas, but the organization kind of closes them down. Hierarchies get in the way. They find it difficult. And especially when you've got leadership and you place people up on a couple of levels, you kind of feel nervous about going and talking to them and you don't want to look foolish and they're just going to say no anyway. How have you got around that? Because that really is an innovation killer, and you're one of the most influential and innovative banks in the world. So you're obviously doing something different.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point, Colin, and I think there's only one answer, is that you've got to do it yourself. And I think because we founded our business on those principles, so I think it's a lot easier for us to run the business that way, because a lot of the people who founded the business is still involved in the business on a day-to-day. That's really important. Now I think it's important to say that, so before we started the business 12 years ago, quite a few of us who were in the business, they worked for another big bank in South Africa, where we also tried to make this happen from inside that big bank. Yeah. And I think we learned very, very quickly, you can't teach elephants to dance. They're not, or elephants are most probably the animal that's going to turn around the slowest. And a big reason for that is, I think, as businesses evolve and as they mature, as they become bigger, as they call it print or make more money, I think the natural instinct of those businesses are to become defensive. So they start protecting what they've built. Now, the question we often ask ourselves in the business is, how do you make the pie? How do you increase the size of the pie? Now, a big part of why businesses become defensive, because they always see the pie, the size of the pie today, as the size of the pie it's going to be forever. We're not of that view. We're of the view that you can consistently bake a bigger pie. And as the size of that pie increases, the question we asked ourselves is, how do we make sure we capture the largest portion of that pie as the pie is growing? Now, to do that, you've got to understand where your customer is. Again, so I don't know what the class's background is or where they work or what they do, but the challenge I'll put to you is, think about your parents or your grandparents, and then think about your kids. Now, the problem when you think about your parents and grandparents versus you think about your kids, you're the one that feels like the idiot, right? Because now suddenly you're like, gee, how are my parents so far behind? But at the very next question is, how are you so far behind your kids? So if you have young kids who are 8 to 10 or whatever the case may be, that today they know exponentially more than you ever did when you were their age. Right? Now, the interesting thing is that 10-year-old is going to be your business's customer in 6 to 8 years from now. The question is, what are you doing today to make sure that customer chooses you when they've got to make that choice? Now, when you become defensive, you can almost never prepare your business for what your customer is going to look like one day. Right? But if from within, what you're constantly going to challenge yourself to do is to evolve with what your customers' needs are telling you to do, is that you potentially insulate your business for the future, right? So you've got to be thinking today already, what does this customer want from me in 6 years from now? What does this customer want from me in 10 years from now? Because if you only have that answer in 6 years' time, I promise you that customer is not choosing you. right? And because our business, is, I suppose, is still so young, and some of the leaders are still in it, I think it's a lot easier for us to manage that. But also, Colin, I think as we grow the business, it becomes a really important principle as to, I like to say, who we allow to come and play on the team. You know, so you can completely destroy that culture by bringing in very experienced technical skill. But the biggest downfall of some of that is that very experienced technical skill is often the skill that's the hardest to change the way they work, how they want to do things, how they want to solve these, call it, newer age problems. So as you scale this business, the type of skill you choose to bring into the business becomes of critical importance as well.
How are you staying fresh? Because with the success that you've had, other organizations with the people in those positions can quite often become um, rather
Yep.
dull. Rather, there's perhaps this
Yeah.
that you could say arrogant, or you could say, you know, they sit there in their ivory towers, but they distance themselves and they become hard to engage. You're staying fresh, and that's not just you;
Cool.
it's the
Yeah.
rest of the leadership team. How do you do that? Is that a deliberate?
100%. So I think one of the biggest things that help us do that. So if you think about what our highest order goal is, our highest order goal is to democratize financial services in every single market we choose to operate, right? So we fundamentally want to disrupt industry. We fundamentally want to increase access to appropriate financial services in any market we operate. Now that's the highest order goal. Right? So it's very purpose driven. It keeps us honest. The thing that keeps us fresh in my mind is, call it, the second order goals. Right? We sat in a company-wide kind of presentation the other day. Today we've got 17 million customers across the 2 banking markets we operate. We've now challenged ourselves in the next 5 years to have 50 million customers. Right? Now I can tell you 3 years ago that wasn't the aim. Right? But as our business is evolving, we are constantly changing what we believe our end goal is based on what we are, where we are today, and what we know today. Now, because ambition is so important to us, it's kind of what drives us. The fact that we say, gee whiz, we've got 17 million customers across the world. In essence, we're saying we've got to triple that in less time than we've built 17 million. We've now got to triple that number in 5 years. Now, if you're not fresh, Colin, you might as well pack your bags and update your CV for that. So I think that second order goals is most probably the thing that's kept us extremely fresh, and we iterate them. So we're not saying, oh, but we said it's this, we haven't gotten there yet. Are we scared to change? Absolutely not. Right? So we don't mind moving the goalpost on that second order goals.
I need to ask you about how fresh you're planning to be, but let's go back to the floor there in Keith, and then I want to talk about partnerships, and then we're going to test your freshness.
Okay, it's actually on the back of what's just been said in terms of the thing that caught me was the very overt, constant reinvention based on the feedback in the here and now, and also the predictive qualities that what basically got you to where you are isn't necessarily going to get you that triple growth that's necessary to take it to 50 million. But my question is actually far more systemic than that. Because when you see organizations that grow at such a rate, or that have a very overt vision or way of actually conducting business, makes them enormously attractive to bigger banks. So my question, therefore, is if, and this is assuming that this has happened, how have you fended off people wanting to buy you and consume all that you've created?
I'm not sure they have. But that's a good question.
Yeah, great question, Keith. But so here's the counter question, though. Who are the biggest banks in the world today?
Yeah.
Who can I say? I've no idea which one would be.
Right. So I'll give you one. Nubank.
Yeah.
Right. Nubank's got 120 million customers across 3 geographies, with about 100 million of those customers in Brazil. So 1 in every 2.5 Brazilians already have a Nubank account. Nubank's not an old traditional bank. They are a proper digital bank.
What's Revolut? Revolut's about 50 million, isn't it?
Yeah, Revolut's got 50 million customers across 48 different geographies. These are all, call it, new age banks. Nubank is now a shareholder of Time Group, right? So if it's the right kind of operation, by all means, come and play the game with us. right? But I can tell you right now, it won't happen over my dead body, but an HSBC, a Citibank, a JP
Yeah, I
Morgan,
wondered whether that was going to be the answer, to be honest.
none of those banks are ever going to own us. That I can guarantee you, because they will own us to absorb us, not own us to accelerate what we've done. But a bank like New, a bank like Revolut, Chime, Kakao, prior to the war in Russia, something like a Tinkoff. These are banks that are revolutionizing the way banking is done across the world. Right now, can I sit here and say we'll never ever be part of a conglomerate of that nature? No, that would be unfair. But I can comfortably say that an HSBC, Citi, JP, Goldman Sachs, those guys ain't ever going to own us. That's for sure.
Thank you for your answer. Are there any other questions that we have here from the floor before we carry on? No? Hold on, we've got one question over here, please.
Now, there is many digital banking. We see that, but we see many that fail. What do you think the main point that made them fail? If you have what things that you think that you prevented to fail, but others don't?
Yes. So I'm going to reverse your question. I'm not worried about those that fail. I'm going to answer what's made us successful. Because I think it's a lot more valuable spending the time on that. So some of the things that's made us super successful is that, again, the non-negotiable is the market we choose to operate in. So if you look at the markets where we've got banks in today, South Africa and the Philippines, regulation is one very important aspect for us. Right? So if the regulatory environment lends itself to very progressive type of banks, that works. Distribution is really important to us. And I know Colin wants to speak about partnerships, and I'm looking at the time. I know distribution is really important to us. And the way we've decided to distribute is through partnering with retail outlets. Now, if you don't have an established retail infrastructure in the country, we're most probably not going to go there because you've got to distort your business model too much. And number 3 is data. Data, I'm sure you guys know, if you guys are sitting in an academic lecture, the buzzwords around the world today is big data, AI, all these kind of things. Data becomes really, really important, and it allows us to make decisions very, very quickly. But also what those 3 things allow us to do is to execute our business model that over time will always have a relatively low fixed cost base that allows us to scale the business and scale the top line without fundamentally scaling your cost line. And being stubborn on some of those things is most probably one of the things that's made us way more successful than the others. Also, one of the other important things are, like I said, on those heuristics, those design principles become important. And often what you try and do is then over-design, because you want to serve these 10 customers differently, and then you want to serve these 1,000 customers differently. And all that does to your business is puts cost and complexity into it. And what we've stubbornly said is we want to remain very, very simple in the way we bring our proposition, to life. So that keeps the business laser focused.
Let's just touch on that a little bit, because there's so much depth to that about other organizations having too much choice, too much capital, and they go and try to do too many things and they become quite bureaucratic and inefficient. You, on the other hand, have got an advantage, and I'm going to be very clear about that. You've got the advantage that for most of your life, and I think still now as well, you've had very little capital, very limited amounts of money.
Yep.
To actually go and design and develop products and services for your customers. And my hypothesis is that the less is more analogy comes through here. When you have less resource, less capital, less choice, and you've got strong purpose, you can do amazing things. Do you have a view on that?
Well, I mean, so absolutely, Colin. And often I think the mistake a lot of us make is we separate personal life principles from professional life principles. I touch wood that it never ever happens to you, but if you down to your last 100 Rand or $100 or whatever currency you work in, if you down to that last 100 of whatever the currency is, and you're not too sure where the next one's coming from, watch how wisely you spend that money. Right? In your personal capacity. Now, business is no different. Right? When you've got finite resources and call it infinite ambition, one of your hardest jobs every day will be to make the right trade-off. Right? I'll touch wood again and say maybe we've been lucky, maybe we've been smart, Colin, but we've gotten very, very few decisions wrong.
Mm.
And when you're
Well,
forced to make that trade-off with limited resources, often you end up making the right one.
let's actually challenge that one. I love that statement that you've made very few decisions wrong. The alternative is that you've made lots of wrong decisions, but you've just pulled out, stopped, exited, reverse track, used the data to go
Yeah,
and tweak whatever you're doing, pivoted as much as possible. I'm sure you have lots of projects and experiments you've run
yeah,
which have been abstract failures, but they were
yeah,
small, not massively expensive, and they've taught you what you need to actually take the right course.
yeah, yeah. So in again on proportions, those decisions, those things absolutely exist in our business. But in proportion, we've definitely made a lot more of the good ones. But the point you made around that is one of the things we say: you fail fast. Right? And
Mm.
often you wanna, oh, I'm convinced this thing can work, throw more money down that gauntlet. We don't do that. So you rightfully pointed out, Colin. But there's not a lot of them in relation to the ones we've gotten right. So we've definitely started products, pulled it back, stopped it completely, no longer available. Yeah, we've made all of those mistakes, absolutely. And I think the important thing is how did we use those learnings to even decrease the probability of those things reoccurring? Yeah.
How do you encourage your colleagues? How do you encourage yourself to stand up and talk to the leadership team and go, look, I've made a mistake. This isn't working. My idea that I thought was amazing is absolutely rubbish. The data. How do you encourage people to admit? Because
Yeah.
that takes real. I mean, that's a real strength of character to be able to admit when you got something
Yeah.
wrong, you've done something wrong.
Spot on. I mean, and I think we live, or at least we're lucky enough to work in a business where those kind of mistakes are not frowned upon at all. Right? And the premise we work on is that we like to believe we're doing a lot of things that haven't been done before. Now, if they haven't been done before, there's a very, very low predictability of what the outcome actually will be. So you've got to be brave enough to make the decision, and then you'll very quickly find out whether it was the right or wrong one. Now, and I think people know we don't frown upon it, but also, like I said, we're a very small knit, very close knit team, and I think people trust each other. And going in, nobody ever expects anything to fail. You give it your absolute best shot at the start. And the other thing, you use the word data. We are such a data transparent business. We get data feeds on the hour, every hour, across so many different variables in our business. Even if you didn't want to come and tell us, somebody else would most probably figure it out very, very quickly. And I think those are things that continue to set us apart.
Let's talk about that partnership model because that's genuinely novel. In order to get that distribution, and you decided you're not handling cash, what was the decision,
Yep.
and how does that model work?
Yeah, so the one thing we knew we needed in South Africa and the Philippines was reach. Now, the only way you kind of get reach is that you've got to be everywhere very, very quickly. And like I said, we've decided we weren't going to lay a single brick. And so we looked very quickly as to which kind of businesses give us that reach overnight. And I think in many, many markets, the answer is always going to be retail. Uh, uh, I think, and that would be the answer globally, most probably. So that's exactly the answer we found in South Africa and the Philippines. So what we essentially did was we partnered with two of the largest retailers in the country. So we partnered with one of the largest food retailers, and we then partnered with the largest clothing retailer in the country. But in essence, what those retailers give us is two big things. One, massive credibility. Both of them happen to be JSE, so Johannesburg Stock Exchange listed companies with massive, massive history behind us. So by being associated to that brand, you get credibility, even though you're only 6 years old, or at the time, 0 years old when we did those deals. And number two, and most importantly, what they give you is a national footprint overnight. Right? So suddenly we were available in more points of presence than any other bank was overnight. And we knew that needed to be a differentiator. Hence, we saw the partnerships in that manner. The beauty about those partnerships, Colin, is that the businesses are completely complementary. Right?
Mm.
It's extremely hard for a retailer to be a bank, and it's extremely hard for a bank to be a retailer. But when you coexist inside each other's environment and you stick to your knitting, I stick to my knitting, what you can build is a super powerful partnership.
Do you think things are going to change much over the coming years? I mean, you're so successful and this model's running so well,
Yeah.
but let's just and this would have been something Herman would have chatted about, I'm sure, with the guys earlier today. We've got two major trends that are coming through. One of them has got something, I'm told, about AI, and the other one has got something to do with blockchain. How are they going
Yeah.
to impact your business, and what are you doing about
Yeah.
it?
The- There'll absolutely be change. It'd be silly for me to sit here and say there won't be, knowing how much has changed just since we've been in operation. The thing that sets you apart is your appetite to embrace that change, right? So if I look at what we're doing inside our business with AI, is that I think where we are right now, we don't think AI is going to replace anybody in our business just yet. We think what AI is going to do is give them superpowers, right? So if you think about what AI can do for your top 20% of decision makers in the business, it's going to fundamentally change the way we work. Now, we don't have any intention of saying, oh, we've got 1,700 people today. How do we use AI to change that to 1,000? We're saying, how do we use AI to make those 1,700 people exponentially better than they are today? And that's one of the big changes we've seen. So we're investing quite heavily in that. I won't necessarily speak about blockchain directly, but just technology changes. If I look at the work we're doing in Vietnam today around creating, call it a very singular architecture to operate in multiple geographies and the amount of efficiency that will give us. So absolutely lots of change. Our business at this point in time embraces all of that. So we adopt and adapt as we go. And I think the minute you stop doing that is most probably when these kind of changes start to hurt you more than enhance you.
Let's put a theoretical in there, but a question to the floor. If I use the term agentic agent, do you know what that means? Does everyone know what that means? Shall I explain it?
Yes, please. Yeah, could you explain it, please, Colin?
So, where we are this year and moving forward into next year, you're going to hear this buzz term agentic agent a lot more frequently. And really what it's describing is a replacement of humans executing tasks with artificial intelligence and technology. And an example in banking could be that we'll all probably know. You probably have a call center, you probably have guys that are doing KYC. And so at the moment, documents will be handed in and submitted, and where you can't automate that, there'll be some people that get involved to go and investigate, to research, to go and then double down and inquire. Maybe they look at politically exposed people, they look at registers, they try to make a human assessment about whether that person should be onboarded. That is a classic scenario where we can see AI is starting to not only give you the information, so ChatGPT helps you to get information. ChatGPT will give you some code which you can use. Where agentic agents come in is it then executes. It takes decisions for you and then makes the payment to another organization for you. It decides to go and release the code base into production. It organizes other agents to go and do a callback service to your customers. And so if you listen to the people in Silicon Valley and you follow what's happening with Google and the lot of the guys out there, you're seeing a lot of noise about, are we getting to a point where these agentic agents are really going to start replacing people? It's not going to just be knowledge workers. It will be the people actively doing things as well. So I bring that up because I want to ask a kind of a hypothetical question about how you'd organize yourself on this. So I'm going to come to you in one of your management meetings, Cheslin. I'm going to say, look, I've been following what's happening with agentic agents and I want to do this. I want to go and have a little bit of money to see if we can spin up a new organization, which is pretty much fully based on agentic agents. And I think there's an opportunity there to go and serve people where we actually don't need people in the bank, in the financial institution. You kind of think it's a crazy idea. What would happen next? How would you go and manage that type of idea? And what would you do with it in terms of taking it forward?
Yeah, so just to give you comfort, Colin, we're already using agentic AI in TymeBank. so it's already live. So we're big on test. So we're big on test and learn. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday in our executive meeting, we approved 2 new product tests. From idea to execution, I think it's going to be a total of 4 weeks. So it'll take us 4 weeks to first presented the idea to having it live in market, tested in consumers' hands. So the approach would be no different with agentic AI. Again, if you think about the fact we want to have 50 million customers around the world, right? Do we think 1,700, or if it's around the world, do we think 10,000 people can serve 50 million customers? Most probably 10,000 will be too much. We don't have that many now, but it's because of the advancement of AI. Do we think even with agentic AI, do we think it will reduce the number of people we need? Most probably not. is most probably just going to change what we actually offer customers over time, the type of service delivered, the service levels we get, the satisfaction scores we can deliver. So what we would do there is whoever came up with the idea, we said, perfect, go and build your test case, bring it back. If we're happy that we've considered everything, more than happy to launch a test POC. Let's see if it works, we scale it. If we think there's things we need to change, we change it. And that's by and large how we operate today anyway.
I mean, do you have a formal process for that? Amazon, for example, have this working backwards model where they've got certain steps people go through to get their ideas initiated. Do you have a formal process about how to take ideas and turn them into executable tasks?
Yeah, I mean, so I wouldn't like I hate the word formal process because that means you follow a set of rules. So we've got we've got this thing in the bank we call a product committee, but we have it because it's legislated. We have it because we've got to, because banking law says we must have it. But so we use that body as call it as the testing ground. So you come, you've got minutes of the meeting, say, perfect, this is what I'm doing. The powers that be have to be in that meeting, approve it, and off we go. So if that's as formal as the process will become, you come and present to that committee, we're happy, we tick the box, and off you go. So and it can come from anywhere. So anybody can be an attendee at that meeting to present an idea. There's no formality as to who or what role you play in the business to be able to come there. You just got to have the right people around the room, call it to veto the decision.
Guys on the floor, we've got 6 minutes left. Questions?
Can you give us now the bank? Can you share with us the bank latest financial ratios or KPIs that you're looking at, like NIMs, cost to income? What are you in these ratios?
Yeah, so I don't have all of them off the top of my head, but I'll give you one financial ratio that means everything to us, and that's cost to income, so the efficiency ratio. So we're sitting at about 89 at the moment. We believe as the business can scale, we'll get that number to sub 30. So we think we can run at about a 25 cost to income ratio of about 25. We don't have a massively large loan book yet, so we've still got crazy high loan to deposit ratios, crazy high liquidity ratios, because we're not overly exposed to lending just yet because we're still relatively young, but that part of the business is growing and growing fast. But the big metric there is cost to income. So we're going to drive over the next, call it 3 to 5 years, we'll drive the 89 down to 25. We think we can get there comfortably, and then obviously in return we think we can run an ROE inside the bank of closer to 40-45%. Interestingly enough, the most important metric in our business is not a financial one. The number one metric in our business today is NPS, so Net Promoter Score. It's the most important metric in our business. So we Net Promoter Score, NPS. So we believe the big thing that
score, if you don't know, is it's a measure for how likely your customers are to refer you on to their friends and family.
Okay.
So the way we look at it is essentially how your customers feel about you. And again, I put the question in your hand. Just think about the last time you were convinced by something you saw on a billboard versus the last time you were convinced by something a trusted source told you. Now, by having the highest NPS in the market, we believe organically we generate the most trusted sources in the market. So that's actually our number one metric as a bank, believe it or not.
So can you know what's the number of this for your application on?
I can't hear that question clearly.
Yes. Yeah, the NPS score. What's the NPS score for the application?
Oh, the NPS score. So our current NPS score is 61, if I'm not mistaken. But we think we've got to be in the high 80s. So the current score is 61. We think we've got to be in the high 80s. Our bank in the Philippines, TymeBank, already has an NPS score of 78. And we think we can get that score closer to 90.
Last question here.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can.
So just a quick question. When you started actually the business of digital banking, did you actually rely on the systems within existing banks, or you partnership with them, or you start all over again? How is it actually? It's actually a huge thing.
Yeah, so we procured in a core banking system. We built all the microservices ourselves. So we definitely didn't rely on any existing infrastructure owned by, call it our competition in market. We had built all our end-to-end connections into the national payment system, etc. That we developed all ourselves.
That's huge by itself, and by itself could be a product for the other fintech to build the platform, the digital as a service.
Spot on. So we do consider whether we're going to spin off a software as a service business on the side, but in essence, you've got the IP to sell it already, 100%.
Wish you all the best. Ah,
AWS
Okay.
banking.
Right. Spot on.
So we're going to have to call it to a close now, Colin. Any final words from you there?
Yeah, look, I mean, I just really want to thank everyone there for listening in. I hope you got value out of it. If you've got questions, I'm on the WhatsApp group, just fire them through. I'll do my best to get answers. I obviously want to say a special thanks, especially after the intro, special thanks to Cheslin there. Because if you remember what he said at the start there, when they hold their meetings and they decide what they're talking about, one of the questions they ask is it going to assist us in some way with our customers? And I was thinking over the last 45 minutes how we can get this call to help Cheslin with his customers, and I couldn't actually come up with a good answer. So he's given up an hour of his time for once to not focus on anything that brings benefit to his time customers, at least in South Africa. And for that, I just take my hats off and thank you very, very much for actually being with us and offering your advice and your stories. And I hope it makes a difference and impact for the people listening in over there in Saudi. So thank you very much, Cheslin.
Perfect. Thanks, Colin. Thanks for the invite and all the best to the students as well. Thanks so much for having me.